Hey, listeners, I'm excited to be back here with Stephanie. I know we've been featuring so many amazing guest episodes, especially for the summertime. And I hope that you've been enjoying those. Please let us know what some of your favorite guests have been so we can continue to deliver that sort of content for you. I hope that you've been able to check those out. So today, Stephanie is here, and we are going to be talking about how the summer in particular, but changing seasons and rhythms in our lives affect our writing practices. This has been especially noticeable for each of us in our writing this summer. Now, we both have school age children, and so therefore our lives revolve around the school schedule in the sense that all of a sudden in summer there's a whole different repertoire of activities than there are during the school year. There's an uptick in travel and that sort of thing that is not, available or accessible while the kids are in school. And especially for me, I have a huge increase in my childcare demands during the summertime. This is a time where not only do I have my own kid, but I also make some additional income by keeping a couple of other kids, which means that the days I used to spend sitting here in this office working on my writing are trickier to manage. So we'll talk a little bit about that throughout this episode about how we've navigated that, how we've succeeded or not succeeded yet in those endeavors. So if you're feeling that grind of the summer and that change of pace and the fact that you have to make some additional or different shifts to your routines, then listen into this episode. If nothing else, you may be able to commiserate with us, or maybe we can offer some kind of tip or insight that you find to be helpful. Stephanie, give us a little bit of an update because it's been a minute. Give us a little bit of update of where your writing is and what your sort of writing practice looks like in this particular moment.
So, in this particular moment, I can't say that my writing practice is very interesting or one that I would say anyone should model their own practice off of right now because it hasn't really been happening much because I've been focused on not only my children and my family and travel, and there's just been a lot of other writing pieces that have come up with respect to keeping up with our posts and our podcasts and all kinds of things. So that has occupied a little bit more of my mind than uh, my own writing. And part of it could be just a little bit of that avoidance because it sometimes feels hard to show up when I'm not sure exactly where I am. Although I will say that when I do finally sit down with my writing, and I can easily pick up where I left off. And so it's just that piece of get it, as they say, like get your butt in the chair, like get to the place or space or wherever it is that you write the best. And I mean, I will say that the last time I did a word count on my manuscript, I had over 20,000 words. So something is there that I've, working with. So that's exciting to see that. And it has evolved and changed. And I think I may finally have a focus. We'll see. As all of you listening who are working on your own projects, you know how things can ebb and flow and change sometimes with where you think it's going. And then all of a sudden, especially for me with fiction, characters all of a sudden do something and I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't the plan or that wasn't the direction I thought it was going. So, yeah, so it's kind of an interesting place to be, but we're definitely here to talk today about where we've been and where we hope to see ourselves going to engage with our writing practice. So, Elizabeth, where are you right now with your writing?
I have struggled to carve out a consistent time for writing. So we started out the summer with our, time to write sessions. I had scheduled them for early mornings because, all the kids show up around 8:30. So I figured, okay, I'll do from 7 to 8. And it just was not ever a time in the morning where I felt the creative juices flowing. I was still like trying to have my morning cup of coffee and get into the groove of the day and just was really struggling to get any sort of effective writing done during that time. I definitely, do better when I have the chance to write with you, Stephanie. And that was a time that's protected in your schedule for your own family. And so that was not a time that you were available. So then we tried a different iteration where we switched to the afternoon, trying to take advantage of when the kids I watch may be either napping or having a quiet time each day. And their nap times, because they're all, 4.5 and 5, have fizzled throughout the summer as some of them prepare to go to kindergarten and everything. And so that also became a very difficult time, even on the rare occasions where the kids wouldn't interrupt me the entire session. I just felt a struggle of shifting from that sort of nurturing use of my feminine energy to the creative use of my feminine energy. Like I just felt like it was already drained. It was already accounted for. It was already used up. And there wasn't really anything I could draw from to do the writing. And so it has been, a consistent struggle and trying to find different solutions, testing them out for a period of time, ultimately finding them to not be super helpful. I have been able to keep up with my journaling pretty consistently, which is helpful, especially as a memoirist, making sure that I'm documenting this awesome trip or this, first camping experience, and that, it could all end up in future short stories or later memoirs. So I know that that's important to do, and I have been keeping up with that. But as far as showing up in my own writing, that has not happened. I've been using my 1 day a week, which is on Mondays, to do all of the podcast guest recording, guest recruiting, all the pre interviews we do in screening. And I've even recorded some guest podcast episodes that haven't been released yet, like as where I appear as the guest on other podcasts. So I've had a number of things like that I've been doing. So really my like open time, my kid-free time to devote to writing or business has been strictly towards the podcast for this summer, which is great because I think we've really been able to deliver some really high quality guest interviews. And I hope that, diverse set of minds and experiences is helping to add some, just different insights and diversity to our conversations. So I really am enjoying that, but my writing has definitely suffered throughout the summer. I've come to terms with it more so, and just knowing that once the school year comes again in, early August, this isn't going to be the way it is forever. It doesn't mean I've given up on my writing or that I'm not as passionate about getting the writing done or about writing the memoir or getting those stories out. It's just I have to recognize that this season, especially with young kids, can derail a little bit, and that doesn't have to be permanent. But also trying to force it is not really working great either.
Yeah, no, you bring up so many good points, especially with how you're sort of processing and coming to terms with it, especially from a mindset perspective, because I think sometimes as writers we can be really hard on ourselves, and we think, okay, we're not doing enough, or we're not writing enough, or there are different ways that we view where we are in the process, or we think we want to be at a certain point, and if we're not there by a certain time, it can feel really defeating. And I think it's good to remember, like you were saying, about the changing seasons of time, and recognizing that sometimes there are just going to be those times in life, at any stage really, where things will come up that don't allow you to take the time in the same way. And like we talked about, we did, try to schedule it. And it was like, as soon as we put it on the calendar and scheduled time, all of a sudden it was completely disrupted by different factors in our life. And then we were like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. And then too, like you, I wasn't always feeling at the particular time that we scheduled, like that I was ready creatively to sit down. And that too is a challenge. I mean, we love writing in community and being able to write with each other and being able to write with others that we know who are writers, and because it does really motivate and inspire, just the energy. But of course, with all of our commitments with family and children and travel and whatnot during the summer, it just isn't always realistic. And so to be able to say, like, okay, what is realistic? And, you know, you keeping up with your journaling, awesome. I got back to my morning pages, which, for those of you listening, if you're familiar with Julia Cameron and the Artist's Way, that's her big platform that she talks about all the time, about the power of just, and hers is, you know, just complete stream of consciousness. You don't have to have any real specific train of thought, which has been helpful. Because if you have listened to previous episodes of our podcast, in episode 32 with Ian Tenenbaum, where he talks about, as in, you know, the ADHD brain and the need to just dump all your thoughts on the page, that's been really helpful for me, because while I'm not like officially diagnosed, I'm definitely giving myself my own, you know, diagnosis here of falling somewhere on the spectrum. And so that's been interesting to bring that back in, and to recognize that some days that's all I do and that's enough. Like, I wrote something, and
Mhm.
you know, eventually it'll bring me back creatively to my own work. But I think too, just thinking about the seasons and how, with all of the different changes that happen, being aware of that in, you know, your own writing life and what that looks like, and to give yourself grace in those times, uh, because I think when we're hard on ourselves, at least I know for me, it stunts my progress even more.
Absolutely. And I have been able to take some of this time because my time is more fragmented or I could get interrupted at any point. Um, the kids do play largely independently. And we go to the park every day. And so I can sit, you know, under a tree and I'll bring whatever book I'm currently reading and my highlighter. And, you know, I have gotten a lot more reading done this summer, which has been
Mm-hmm.
helpful. Definitely tackled a couple of books that I've been meaning to read. We did a whole conversation about The Alchemist, and I even brought in some insights from Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert that I'd been reading. And so we've got, you know, I've done a lot more reading than I typically do when I'm super immersed in my own writing. So the reading has come back, and that's been a nice way to sort of fill those gaps and still feel like I'm growing as a writer. Recently I started picking up Shelley Reed's Go as a River. And just even seeing her verb usage is just like phenomenal. Like she just uses the most gorgeous verbs. Um, and so, you know, that exposure to other people's writing even is still helpful. And, you know, I do think it just comes down, Stephanie, to mindset and, you know, yes, try a couple things, see if you can figure out what works for you. Some people have the discipline of just grinding it out and sitting and doing, regardless of how they feel. Um, for me, I'm just at the point in my life where I try to do the things that feel like good and right in my body, and I try very hard to listen to that deep like intuition. And so if I'm not feeling it, I try to ask myself, what is it that I need right now? And if that is a walk instead, then I allow myself to go for that walk instead. Um, and so, yeah, that means I haven't gotten a ton of writing done, but I know this process. Like I've been in this writing process for so long. It feels like that even when I take like larger breaks from the writing, just like I had to do last summer, this is not a new phenomenon that summers are
Mm-hmm.
a different change of pace in life. I usually come back to the writing with a renewed vigor and some additional
Mm-hmm.
insights and clarity. And so I am kind of keeping that in the back of my mind. Like, this doesn't mean it's a detriment to my writing process. I'm gaining all sorts of, you know, insights and things that I'll be able to pull on when I actually do have the time to sit down and put some, you know, larger, you know, word counts to paper again.
Well, yeah, and you're so right about the power of rest. And I know we have a very early podcast episode on that. We'll have to go back and put that in the show notes when this episode comes out. But yeah, the power of rest. to, bring ideas, to let ideas kind of mull for a little around, sort of be tossed around in your head for a little bit before they actually come out. There's so much power in that. And it's easy to forget that because, of course, we live in a culture where oftentimes rest is frowned upon. It's seen as, oh, you're not being productive because you're resting, when in fact, for a creative person, it can be one of the most productive things you do. And I love that ask yourself when you're in a moment of, well, what do I need right now? And that's such a powerful aspect of self care. And, that's so important as writers for us to remember the value of self care in our lives. And especially when we get busy and we have a lot of things we're juggling, it can be hard to say, like, it's okay for me to rest or take a break or do something different or do something for myself. And especially, as moms, it's even harder sometimes to say, like, oh, it's okay for me to do something for myself. And it's okay for it to not be something that I'm working on, professionally or whatever it is. Like, I can go, for a walk, or I can go, soak at the hot springs, or I don't know, whatever it might be that you enjoy. And of course, going back to thinking about, Julia Cameron and Morning Pages, she also talks about the power of a walk. And I've found recently that one of the things I've been doing when I'm walking is recording little thoughts for myself. And that's been really helpful for me to go back to just, have things where my ideas are, I can go back and listen to them. And so that's a strategy that when I don't really feel like sitting down at my computer or putting pen to paper, that has been really helpful. And so again, I mean, as we were just talking about, like the different strategies that can come up to help you still feel like you're moving yourself forward. Like you said with reading, I mean, I too have been reading so much more. And we do have a lot of podcast episodes here where we talk about how much we've learned from, other authors. And so that's also powerful.
Yeah, and you've been on a lot of trips too, where I know you've sent me, text messages like, "Oh, you wouldn't believe what just happened with my rental car. That's something I could use in a story." You've been taking
Hmm.
notes of these various, experiences that you've encountered in all sorts of your travels and just day-to-day life that I think will provide valuable insights or content frameworks for your fiction as you dig back into it again as well.
Yeah, that's been one thing too. I keep thinking like, oh, I need to text this to someone so that I don't forget, because I forget like, oh, I could open my notes app. But it's more fun when I can, share something that's sort of outlandish where you go like, really? This is really happening to me right now. And so I do think it'll add, great content for my novel. And so yeah, so that's been fun. And I know, I mean, you've shared too that even some of your newer stories, how they, are going to be great for, future projects, or even as we talked about, getting our work out there in the world, writing a short story and submitting it. And you've had something already submitted that was published, which is awesome in this season, in this past seasons that have passed. So, there are always things that are important to celebrate. I know that I was listening to, I can't remember what I was listening to because I listened to so many different podcasts and such, but there was something about the power of celebrating wins and how important that can be for just, even if it's a small win, like, oh, I wrote a sentence, or I, posted on Instagram, or I sent my email newsletter out, or whatever it might be, you know, that you can celebrate. Because of course, as writers, the other piece is we wear so many hats, even if you have a traditional publisher. I mean, if you've been listening for a while, you know that Abby Jimenez is one of my favorite authors, and she does the majority of her marketing. I mean, you don't see the marketing coming from her publishing company except for when she has a book coming out.
Mhm.
She's posting stories about her dogs, and she's posting, stories about her writing, and she's, I mean, just all the different offers when books are this and that and the next thing. And so that's also important to remember, that no matter what kind of publishing path you're on, there's always going to be some piece of needing to show up for yourself. And so
Mhm.
that can, be a lot of decision making. And that's why the power of, celebrating even small wins can be so helpful for showing up for yourself.
Yeah, and I think honestly, one of our biggest wins has just been our consistency with these podcast
Mm-hmm.
episodes. Like, even as we've both had numerous trips and on various parts of the globe, and our other like family obligations, we've still been able to put out an episode every week. We've been able to bring in guests, which has been so interesting and intriguing and just breath of fresh air to
Mm-hmm.
me. And so many of those conversations I know I'm going to want to revisit, um, even as I get to writing again. But even just
Mm-hmm.
going through those and being a part of them, recording them, it keeps me motivated to keep going. And I think what's important to remember is that when you have these sort of like down times as a writer, that doesn't have to be the end. That doesn't mean that your work in progress has to develop a whole like film of dust. Like, yes, allow that time to be, but then also make plans for when you can get back to it. So like I know when school starts again, I know there might be a little bit of like transition time into that routine again,
Mm-hmm.
but then I plan to be right here, at this computer. And I will probably be carving out a bigger chunk than even what I was doing in the springtime, just to like jumpstart again in the fall. I've been doing lots of hiking,
Mm-hmm.
lots of outdoor activities throughout the summer. This is sort of the peak time where we live to be doing those sort of things, rafting trips
Mm-hmm.
and 14ers and that sort of thing. So it's like strike while the iron's hot, take advantage of those things that are only seasonally relevant, and then get back to the writing. But don't fall into this, mental trap that means that, it's the end or that's how it's going to, forever be. And just remember that, make a plan for picking it back up and what that's going to look like. I've certainly learned a lot about my writing process through this. You and I both have talked a lot about the fact that we work better, we write better words when we're writing together. Not only is it the accountability piece, but I'm able to get just more in the zone when I have that structure, when I know someone else is doing
Mm-hmm.
it too, where I'm not just slogging it out on my own. That's a really, pivotal piece for me. So that's really helpful to learn, because then as I move forward, then that's something like when we can, let's write together.
Mm-hmm.
Let's identify those times in our schedules that we can write together and continue to offer that to our community, because it's so helpful for my writing.
Well, yeah, and as we've talked about before, especially after we went to the conference earlier this year about, a couple of the authors talking about how they had formed their own little group of, writers of, there were three of them in that group, and we've certainly known other people who have, two or three or four in a writing group, and just the power of that. And whether you come and join us during our writing time or, find your own people, that I definitely agree with you. There's something about that, you know, accountability, you're getting the energy from someone else. And I know for the times when you and I haven't had that opportunity to write together, that oftentimes I have to make myself leave the house. I have to go to a coffee shop. I have to go someplace else. And I am someone who is able to, write with that noise around me. Sometimes I put my headphones in and just kind of, dim the sound, turn down the sound a little bit so that I don't have to hear all of the conversations. But of course, too, like as a fiction writer, sometimes little nuggets of eavesdropping on conversations can add something or inspire something, or just observing people out in the world, because of course, so oftentimes I much prefer to be at home and not be out in the crowds and all of that. But there is definitely good stuff out there for for writing inspiration. But yeah, like Elizabeth said, sort of learning for yourself and reflecting on, what works for me in my writing process and for me as a writer. And sometimes it takes time to get to know exactly what those pieces are. And certainly if you're shifting into something new, I know for me, the shift to fiction is very new. And so sometimes I think one of my blocks is like, oh, I'm not good at this. And I have to remind myself that you are good at it. You're just beginning, and everybody's a beginner at some point. And so it's just continuing to work through and be okay with it not being, you know, the way I want it to be the first time out, which is also something I struggle with. So,
I was listening to a podcast on a hike recently. I think I told you about this. It was with Tim Ferriss on, I think, Modern Wisdom, Chris Williamson's podcast. And he was talking about writing one of his later books, not even the first one, the 4-day work week, 4-hour work week, I mean, is
yeah.
one of his later ones. And he talked about something about like 19 drafts and 4 total rewrites. And it was so helpful for me to be listening to that because it was like, oh, okay, I'm only up to 2 total rewrites, so I'm not completely off base. And even just listening to certain podcasts and content, I found to be really motivational and inspiring for, continuing to push forward and continuing to, think about the writing, to work on the writing in whatever capacity I can. Um, and so, listener, if that's helpful at all to you to find those podcasts, maybe like this one, that just helps you stay motivated, then I think that's amazing. If you have other podcasts that you really enjoy, mention those in the comments so that the whole, community can see and add to our repertoire. There's plenty of listening hours to spread. You don't have to be devoted to just one writing podcast. We are so grateful for the subscribers, for the regular listeners. And we hope that your summer and your writing projects are going well. And if they're not living up to what you had hoped they would be, hopefully this conversation today has helped you realize that you're not alone in that. And we will all be taking on, some bigger writing pushes in the fall when the season changes and when the schedule gets back to something a little bit more like normal. But thank you for listening. Please share with anyone that you think could use this episode and let us know what your favorite guest has been over the past couple of weeks.